Welcome to this video. Sadly the audio corrupted, so I'm having to overdub it, but as you may recognise, I was at the Greenwich Observatory in London, which gives its name to the Greenwich Meridian and Greenwich Mean Time. So half of me was in the Eastern Hemisphere and half of me was in the Western Hemisphere. I was there because back in 1896 one of my relatives was an astronomical computer, one of a small group of people who did the mathematical calculations to create maritime almanacs. In the 125 years since then, the world has progressed massively in this area, and we probably find ourselves at a really interesting point in time in relation to the role and capabilities of computing. So this got me thinking about, with the rapid propagation of these new technologies out into the marketplace, what might we as photographers and videographers need to be thinking about in order to really embrace and leverage their capabilities? So AI is almost this omnipresent term these days. We don't seem to be able to move without encountering it. People talking about the opportunities of AI or the threats of AI, perhaps being on a comparison with global warming and a threat to mankind. Well, to me, AI isn't new. We've had AI and machine learning for decades. Whether it's in the search engines we use, Google, Bing, whether it's in predictive text, predictive TV guides, or perhaps we experience it in online shopping. People who bought what you're buying also bought the following, trying to encourage us to buy more. What's new though is generative AI. And this is in part due to progression of algorithms, but it's also in part due to progression of processing power. The amount of processing power we have in our smartphones or our mirrorless cameras has grown exponentially with Moore's law. And therefore, AI is perhaps moving from purely reactive to becoming more proactive in what it can achieve for us. This rise of generative AI or more proactive AI is vexing many industries, but none more perhaps than the creative industries, whether that's the legal profession who create contracts, documents and agreements, whether it's journalism and media, whether it's the music industry, where the replication of artists' voice and creation of new music is challenging them, when we're seeing perhaps some partnerships forming between the likes of Universal Music and Google. And then you've got photo and video, which are equally similarly challenged. So can you avoid it? Should you avoid it? And how might it be approached? Three big questions. So let's start with that first one. Can you avoid it in the world of digital photography? Well, I guess you can if you don't do any internet research of where you're going to shoot or what you're going to shoot. If you perhaps don't use a smartphone, for sure, but if you turn off everything in your camera, all the functionality that's there to support you. You shoot in manual mode, you ignore the metering, you use manual focusing, you use manual white balance, and you capture in RAW with no post-processing. So it probably is achievable, and it could be a really interesting challenge to do. It'd be interesting to know in the comments below, is that a challenge that would excite you? Is that your normal way of shooting? But should we go to these lengths? Well, unless you're seeing it as a challenge or it's particularly your style, probably not. You've possibly invested in a modern mirrorless camera which has various levels of support that rely on AI increasingly. So other than perhaps as a challenge, or you have a personal preference for shooting that way, maybe the only real use of thinking at that extreme is possibly for journalistic purposes, where actually capturing the reality in its raw form is really important. So really the question is, what should we use it for, and how far should we go with AI? And then perhaps, how transparent do we need to be about how much we've used it? So I see it as a bit of a continuum, from perhaps shooting all manual at one end, through to fully generative AI created images at the other end, which today probably needs some kind of human prompt, but in the future may become even more automated. In between, we probably have where most of us sit. Closest to manual is what I call AI support, whether that's autofocus, auto metering, or perhaps in post-processing the auto button in Lightroom. Equally in your smartphone it could be portrait mode. All of these are about providing guidance and enhancing the images we can create, but we can override them as photographers in many cases to choose the style we want. Next along that continuum is what I call AI adjustments. And these are things like denoise, where there has been a massive step forward with the use of AI in turning perhaps what were unusable, noisy, high ISO images into totally usable, really crystal clear images increasingly. Equally, there's AI in masking or object removal, which is taking many steps forward in most post-processing packages. These AI adjustment tools are about taking an image we've captured and about removing something. Next along the continuum is AI manipulation. Here we are adding something to the image that wasn't there when we shot it. We're actually manipulating the image to change that image. So it's a step further along the continuum from those adjustments or removal of something that was in the original image. We're actually adding something in. We're manipulating that image. To me, all of the points on the continuum are valid. Let's face it, in the Renaissance, the great masters used artistic license. But what matters is the motive. And this is where transparency is going to become increasingly important, I feel. Up to a point, there's probably no need to disclose that we've used AI and we've perhaps removed a few things. However, there is a point, a tipping point, where we do need to increasingly perhaps disclose that we've perhaps added things into our image or we've manipulated it using AI. So there is a tipping point. But that tipping point will probably vary depending on the usage of the image. If we're using it for journalism or perhaps entering a competition, that tipping point is going to be further across to the left. Equally, we've got to think about what's our motive. Why did we add or remove something? Equally, that tipping point is going to change as technology evolves and what technology can do that we cannot see easily in the image changes. And therefore we're going to have to think about that tipping point depending on various dimensions or variables. So in creating and recording this video, it got me thinking that actually, is there an increasing need for a Creative Commons type approach to tagging photos and videos to show how much AI has been used in their generation, how much manipulation has been involved? What are your thoughts on this? It's a topic that's increasingly vexing a lot of people. It'd be great to have a view from active photographers and videographers. How much are you using the in-camera AI-driven or AI-powered functionality? How much are you using AI in your post-processing to adjust, add, or remove things from your images? It'd be great to have your thoughts, your comments in the chat below. And as always, I look forward to seeing you in a future video.